Chapter 3. Stuck in the Spider's Web. Rolling hills of green yarn grass stretched out for miles. Mally grinned from ear to ear. "I'm here," she thought. "It was all real. I'm going to find Grandma today." Her heart swelled with hope, and she longed to take off her shoes again and run through the field. But first she had to take care of the door. Mally leaned down and pulled the plastic wedge out of her backpack. Jamming it under the door, she checked and double-checked that it couldn't swing closed. Satisfied, Mally took off running across the quilt. She raced up one hill, then another, barely feeling winded as she sprinted over the grassy slopes. She stopped at the top of a particularly tall hill and looked out over the landscape. She loved the variety of colors in the green fabrics and yarns. The hill she was standing on was bright lime green and decorated with a fine yarn that rose to her knees. The next hill was pieced from much darker fabric, with thick rows of chunky yarn stitched to the surface. Mally couldn't help herself. She sat down and peeled off her socks and shoes. Shrugging off her book bag, she rolled back and forth on the top of the hill, reveling in the feel of the soft fibers sliding against her skin. She flapped her arms and legs back and forth, then sat up quickly and laughed. She'd made a snow angel impression with wide wings and a full skirt in the grass. She flopped back down and took a deep breath and held it. Mally knew she could happily spend days rolling down the hills and soaking in the warm sunshine. She let her breath out slowly and got to her feet. It was time to get busy searching for Grandma. She was just reaching for her bag to stash her shoes and socks when it flopped over. It gave a lurch, then another lurch, and Mally jumped back with a start. It was as if something was inside, fighting to get out. Her bag gave another lurch and a muffled voice called out, "Mally, can you let me out, please?" Mally had never heard that voice before, but her heart recognized it instantly. Her fingers moved involuntarily to the top of the bag, and she unzipped it as fast as she could. Out stepped Miss Bunny. Mally gasped and stumbled back, and would have probably tumbled down the hill, but with a giant leap, Miss Bunny jumped off the ground and grabbed Mally's hands in her stuffed paws. She was still only around 15 inches tall, but she was surprisingly strong. They sat on the hill, staring into each other's eyes. Mally spoke first in a whisper. "How are you doing that?" The rabbit smiled kindly. "I am as surprised as you are, my dear." That voice again. Mally could have sworn she'd known that voice her whole life, whispering soothing words whenever she was sad or angry. But how? Have you always been alive, but you just couldn't speak or move in the real world? How does it feel? Mally could barely believe her eyes. She poked at Miss Bunny's arm and shook her head slowly as the doll caught her finger with both paws. "I think so. I'm honestly not sure," the rabbit said, giving her a squeeze. Mally sat up, and Miss Bunny stood before her, barely taller than the yarn grass waving in the breeze around them. She looked exactly the same as she had before, her pink calico dress hanging past her knee joints, with bits of white lace trimming the sleeves and hem. The only thing that had changed were her eyes and mouth. Where before her eyes only had a light sheen from black embroidery floss, they now glimmered in the sun with the faintest hint of brown in the center. Her mouth, which had been stitched into a soft pink curve that was neither a smile nor frown, was now moving as she spoke and changing expression. It was weird, like watching a statue come to life. Mally tried to wrap her head around the fact that her best friend in the world, the creature who knew her every secret, every embarrassing detail, Every joy, sorrow, triumph, or tribulation Mally had ever gone through was alive and talking to her. I would suspect it's something to do with this magical place. I've never been able to move or talk before now, Miss Bunny said, looking around. As for how it feels good, I guess. She stretched out her arms and turned in a wide circle. She stumbled and fell backward onto the grass with a little oomph. You've never walked before. It might take a little practice. Mally laughed and rose to her feet. She bent and picked Miss Bunny straight off the ground by habit. She was just bringing her close for a hug when she froze, staring into the doll's eyes. Miss Bunny was alive now, not just a stuffed toy she could pluck off the ground whenever she liked. "I'm so sorry," she said, setting her down quickly. "I guess that was pretty rude. I wouldn't want some giant just grabbing me off the ground." "It's okay. This is a lot to take in for both of us, I think. How about I ride on your shoulder for right now?" Mally leaned down and extended her arm, allowing Miss Bunny to climb on by herself. The doll scrambled up onto Mally's shoulder, then took a second to arrange her dress. She smoothed her ears down around her little chest, and Mally felt her heart skip. She had always set Miss Bunny's ears in the exact same way when she left for school every morning. "Ready?" Mally asked. "Ready." Barefoot, Mally set off walking slowly down the sloping hill. The doll added almost no weight to her shoulder, but it was unnerving to feel her soft paws clinging to her shirt. As they moved down the slope, Mally remembered Rose, the fight, Miss Bunny's ear. How are you feeling, Miss Bunny?" "I don't have much to compare it to, but I'd say I'm feeling just fine. Why do you ask?" "Well, last night," Mally trailed off, embarrassed to bring up the incident and her horrible sister. "Oh, that." Miss Bunny shrugged. "It hurt more to see you so upset. I don't think Rose meant to rip my ear off, Mally. She comes to me for a hug now and then, so she's not quite as tough as she likes you to think." "Rose hugs you?" Mally couldn't believe it. "So it doesn't hurt now?" "No, it doesn't hurt at all. Your dad can make some very fine stitches, despite his hands being a bit rough," she said with a half smile. "What?" Mally stopped dead and stared at her friend. "I thought Mama stitched your ear back on." "No, she she just couldn't manage it," Miss Bunny said sadly. "I wish I could have told her it wouldn't matter if the stitches were huge or not. It would have done her good to fix something. It might have helped her sew herself back together a bit. I believe she went back to bed early last night." A stitch of fear threaded through Mally's heart. What would happen if Mama didn't start to get better soon? All the more reason to find Grandma and bring her home as quickly as she could. "So we need to get to the path that starts up there," Mally said, changing the subject and pointing at a spot in the distance where a gray path began threading its way up the mountain. "That's where Patch said to meet him." "About that. What did he say exactly?" "You remember?" "Anything you told me in the real world, I heard, dear. I'm just not sure I like the sound of this cat." "He is a bit grumpy," Mally said, "but I think he wants to help. He told me to go home just in time yesterday. If I'd been any later, Dad would have called the police." "But have you thought about what we'll do if we don't find your grandma quickly? I don't know exactly how long we've been away, and the way you left the alarm running." "I know, I should have shut it off, but I just had to get back here." Mally swept her arms wide. "Isn't it amazing?" "Amazing doesn't begin to cover it, my dear," Miss Bunny said with a smile. Mally walked faster, her momentum carrying her down one hill, then up the next, in a hurry to reach the spot where Patch had told her to meet him. Miss Bunny clung to the backpack straps on Mally's shoulders, her skinny legs crossed at the ankle and her long ears streaming behind her head in the breeze. Mally was relieved when she felt the texture of the stitching under her feet change from soft tufts of grass to hard knots. She looked down and found millions of tiny gray knots covering a narrow strip of dark brown fabric that formed a path up the mountain. She stopped to put her shoes back on, and Miss Bunny slipped down from her shoulder. She tried out her legs again and was only a little wobbly as she walked in a wide circle around Mally. "How does it feel?" Mally asked. "I'm not sure I can describe it. I've seen you walking, running, and doing all sorts of things for years. I guess I had an idea of what it would feel like, but never expected to be able to do it myself." Miss Bunny shrugged. "It feels weird, I guess." Mally laughed. Somehow the word weird seemed odd coming from Miss Bunny. Shoes and socks back on her feet, Mally stood and looked around. "Patch said he would meet us here and take us to Grandma. I think if we find her quickly, everything will be fine." Miss Bunny looked up at the sky and shook her head. "Does it get dark here? We have no way to know how much time has passed. We could always come back tomorrow and search in a different direction. There's always the weekend, too." "No, Patch said he heard a maker was here. He's going to take us to her." Mally couldn't remember exactly what Patch had said, but she wasn't ready to leave yet. "Well, he isn't here, and I think we should head back. It will take at least that much time to walk back to the door, maybe longer." "Just a bit further," Mally protested. "We've come this far," she thought. "I don't want to give up now." Miss Bunny didn't argue. She trailed behind Mally, slowly but steadily getting her footing. The mountain cast a shadow over the path, and the sun didn't seem to be shining as brightly, even though they were closer to the sky than ever. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." Patch was perched on a rock on the side of the path, the red tip of his tail twitching in time with Mally's footsteps. "Patch, there you are!" Mally impulsively scooped the cat into her arms. His body went rigid as she hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Patch. Now where is Grandma? Or the maker you were talking about yesterday? Can you take us to her?" Mally set him back on the rock and laughed at Patch's dazed expression. He shook himself and jumped down to circle Miss Bunny. "Now who is this tasty creature?" he said with a toothy grin. "Tasty?" Mally exclaimed. "You don't mean you're thinking about eating Miss Bunny because she's a rabbit and you're a cat?" "I believe we're based on those animals and have some of those characteristics, do we not?" Patch held up a paw close to his face and slowly extended tiny silver claws. Mally leaned down, intrigued, and took his little paw in her hands. She ran her finger over his claws and found them surprisingly sharp, even though they were obviously stitched with gray thread. "That is so cool. Grandma has some silk thread that's almost exactly that color. I've never seen her use it except for really special projects." "Then I would doubt it's the same thread in my claws." Patch shook himself free and narrowed his eyes at Mally. She reached out to pet his head, but he ducked out of reach before she could touch him. He started up the path at a fast pace, and Mally and Miss Bunny scrambled to keep up. "You said there was another maker here? What did you call this land again?" Mally's head was buzzing with questions. "Where has the maker been hanging out?" "Yes, Quilst. Around." Mally was confused for a second, then realized he'd answered her question in the shortest way possible. "But where is she? Quilst, you said? This is such a big place. Is this just my grandma's quilt? Can any quilt do this?" "I said I'd take you to her, so that's what I'm doing. Take a hint and save your breath. The path is going to get much steeper. Mally tried her best to be quiet as she followed behind the scrappy cat, taking in the delicate stitches embellishing the purple and blue mountains. Nothing could dim her excitement at the prospect of finding Grandma and bringing her home. Miss Bunny trailed behind on the shortest of short legs, and Mally occasionally stopped and waited for her to catch up. She offered to carry her best friend, but Miss Bunny just waved her off, obviously determined to make it up by herself. The path wound around the base of a blue mountain. Mally remembered watching Grandma carefully cut out the shapes and turn the edges of the fabrics before gluing them in place. She'd constructed the entire mountain chain in one piece before moving to her machine to stitch along the edges. "Blanket stitch," Mally said, touching the line of special blue stitches that ran along the folded edge of the fabrics. Grandma had told her the name once of the distinctive stitch, and while Mally hadn't really been listening, somehow she'd remembered that little detail. "Mally, I think this is far enough," Miss Bunny said. "I have a bad feeling about this place. I think we should go back." Mally turned and found Miss Bunny had stopped, her arms crossed firmly over her pink dress. "But if I don't bring Grandma back, nothing will have changed." Mally kept walking. "We've come this far, just a bit further." "But what about your family? Rose must have called your dad by now, and I bet he's really worried." "If I bring Grandma back, it won't matter. Everything will be fine again," Mally snapped. "I liked it better when she didn't argue with me." She wanted Miss Bunny to support her, not constantly remind her they were on a time limit. Mally sped up, her legs stretching further with each step. She didn't look back to see if Miss Bunny was following as she rounded a dark bend in the path. 2 mountains loomed on either side of the trail, blocking out almost all light. It was like stepping into a dark, narrow tunnel, and Mally pressed her hands to the sides, feeling her way forward. "Patch, is this the right way to go?" she called, seeking reassurance, but no reply came. She took a cautious step forward, then another, her eyes straining to see through the gloom. "Miss Bunny, are you coming?" She was just looking back to check on her friend when her hands sank into the wall. With a shriek, she whipped her head around, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She couldn't see anything in the dim light, but the texture of the fabric under her fingertips had changed. The woven surface was moving. Soft fibers slid against her skin, as if the threads forming this wall were alive. The sensation tickled up her arms, and as she tried to brush the feeling away, Mally suddenly found she couldn't move. She tried to pull her arms back, but they didn't budge. She leaned back, bending her knees for more leverage, but her legs were stuck too. "What? Why can't I? Miss Bunny!" Mally called. "Miss Bunny, I'm caught! There's a wall! I can't move!" She listened for a response, but could barely hear anything over the pounding of her heart. The scent of cloves and lemon filled her nose, stronger here than anywhere she'd been in the quilt before. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. She squinted and could just make out the details of the shifting wall in front of her. Tiny white threads were weaving themselves together in a pattern that looked frighteningly familiar. "Spiderweb," Mally shrieked, thrashing wildly. But as soon as she had touched it, the living threads in the web had caught her shirt and pants and begun weaving through the fabrics. She looked down to find row after row of perfectly spaced stitches running through her jeans. "Mally, what's wrong?" Miss Bunny's voice called from behind, but Mally was too distracted to answer as a wiggling thread from the wall caught hold of her sleeve. It wove rapidly through the material, in, out, There was no needle on the end. The tip of the thread burrowed its way through her shirt like a worm, forming a line of white stitches that seemed to glow against the red fabric. "Mally, what's going on?" Miss Bunny called again. "Get it off, get it off, get it off!" Mally screamed. The threads made an awful sound as they slithered through her hair, pulling her head into an awkward angle so she couldn't see more than her own shoes. She twisted and shrieked, panicking when she realized just how little she could move. "Please stop struggling, dear," Miss Bunny said in her calm voice. "Can you pull on just one thread with your hand? See if you can break them one at a time."
"I can't move!"
"Calm down. We'll figure a way out of this." Mally felt Miss Bunny climb up her back and tug on her arm. The web bent and bowed with the movement, but Mally remained firmly attached. "Patch! Patch! Help me! You'll be able to cut me out with your claws! Please, Patch! I need your help!" "He's gone, Mally," Miss Bunny said quietly in her ear. "I don't know when he slipped away, but I don't see him anywhere." "What are we going to do?" Mally strained against her bonds, even though she knew it wouldn't do any good. "How is this happening? Why would Grandma have made this awful thing?" She stared down at her shoes and begged her brain to work. "What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?" She watched as more threads wove around her ankles. So many lines of stitching ran through her jeans, they looked more white than blue. Something about the stitches gave Mally an idea. "My sewing box! Find the little scissors inside. You can cut me free." Miss Bunny's light weight shifted across her back, and Mally heard the zipper open. She rooted around in the book bag, and the metal sewing box opened with a click. Then came another metallic sound, but it came from somewhere in front of her, further up the path. Snip, snip, snip. Mally froze. "Are you doing that?" she whispered. She couldn't move her head, so she squeezed her eyes shut and focused all her energy on listening for the sound. "No," Miss Bunny said, "that isn't me. Is there something coming?" She wiggled around in the backpack and quietly pulled the zipper closed. Her question threw Mally for a loop. Who is making that sound? What is making that sound? Mally hadn't met anyone in Quilst except Patch, but he couldn't possibly be the only animal living in this world. With dawning horror, she gazed at the spider web stitched right in front of her eyes. Snip, snip, snip. Mally's mind suddenly filled with the image of a huge spider, of giant pincers clicking below a mass of glowing red eyes. A dark shape shifted in her peripheral vision, and she panicked. "It's a spider! It's a spider! Oh my God, it's a spider!" She screamed and kicked, fighting harder than she ever had in her life, but she only became more woven inside the web. Soon her entire body was wrapped up so tight she couldn't move. She couldn't open her eyes. She couldn't even scream. Hot tears slid down her cheeks, and her nose began to run. The fibers pressing against her face were soaked with tears and snot, making it difficult to breathe. Snip, snip, snip. Dread pooled in Mally's belly as the clicking sound drew closer and closer. Without warning, her body rolled forward. Blood rushed to her head as she hung upside down for several seconds. Smoothly, as if she were trapped in the middle of a massive marble, her body rolled up and over again. Mally's head spun and her stomach churned as the rolling motion picked up speed. Dimly, Mally felt Miss Bunny press her paws against her back and whisper through the fabric of her book bag. It's okay, Mally. We'll figure this out. It's okay. It's all going to be okay. That was the last thing Mally heard as her body spun into darkness. Mally, time to get up, Grandma called. There was nothing like the smell of cinnamon and cloves in the morning. Grandma must be making pumpkin pancakes. Mally, wake up! Someone was nudging her shoulder. She rolled onto her stomach, reaching out to pull her pillow over her head, but the material brushing against her fingers didn't feel right. It wiggled. She sat up, suddenly wide awake. She was resting on a cushion in the corner of a strange room. The walls, floor, and ceiling were dark purple, and the only light came from a small square window. Something crawled over her arms, and she shrieked, jerking back. "Shh, it's okay," Miss Bunny whispered, holding out an orange ball. "See, it's not a spider. It's just a wad of thread." In the dim light, it certainly looked like a spider. Fibers stuck out from its body and wiggled in all directions. The cushion was covered with them. "Was I just sleeping under that?" Mally asked, scrambling to her feet. Memories of the day returned, and she whipped her head around. "Where are we? What brought us here?" She checked her shirt and pants for signs of the white threads that had stitched through her clothing, but they had all disappeared. "We're in one of the mountains. I think the purple mountain in the center of the quilt," Miss Bunny said. Her voice was so soft Mally had to lean close to hear. "I have no idea what trapped you, but whatever it is, it's bad. I think it's looking for your grandma." "Grandma? She's here?" Mally didn't wait for a response as she ran to the window. Her stomach lurched. They were hundreds of feet up. The patchwork landscape of quilts stretched out below, green grass blurring to gray in the distance. She tried to ignore the heights as her eyes skimmed the hills, searching for any sign of movement. The sun hadn't moved from its spot in the middle of the blue sky. "I guess it doesn't get dark here. That'll make it easier to find her." "I don't know if your grandma is here or not," Miss Bunny said. "I overheard the thing that took us saying, 'Bring me that maker,' but I don't know." She shook her head. "Mally, we need to get home. It's been hours since you left." "But Grandma must be here. If someone else is looking for her, that must mean something, right?" "Maybe, but that someone has also locked you in a room in a mountain. Unless you can sprout wings and fly, we're going to need a plan to escape." She nodded at the door on the opposite wall. "We're stitched inside. I tried to open it and it won't budge." "What if we cut our way out?" Mally ran to her book bag and pulled out her scissor necklace. She looped the chain around her neck and slipped the scissors out of their case. Then she stopped, frowning at the tool in her hand. "How can I cut the quilt?" she thought. "Grandma made it. If I cut it, won't that mess it up?" She decided to make a small cut along the edge of the door where it would be the least noticeable. She widened the hole and looked inside. There was another layer of blue fabric underneath. She cut again, then again. Each time she snipped, she expected to see something different, but the layers were endless. She cut the hole wider and pulled with both hands. With a loud rip, 4 layers of cloth split from floor to ceiling, but it only revealed more fabric underneath. "We're never going to get out," Mally said. "It must be dozens of layers thick." "We might be able to use this material for something else, though," Miss Bunny mused, pulling at the fabric to test its strength. She gave the blue cloth a sharp tug, and 4 large pieces fluttered to the floor. Mally turned to look at the window on the opposite wall. The seed of an idea was just sprouting in her mind when she heard. Snip, snip, snip. It was right outside the door. She scooped up Miss Bunny along with the blue fabric and stuffed her unceremoniously into the backpack. She swung the pack onto her back so she could make a run for it if there was a chance. Snip, snip, snip. Mally shrank into the corner, slipping her scissors into her back pocket. She gripped the book bag straps with both hands, preparing to run. The door fell away suddenly. A bright, flashing light filled the room. "Don't you like your room?" a high voice asked. Mally shook her head, trying to squint past the light. She was focusing so hard on seeing the creature, she couldn't understand the question. "It's one of the best in this mountain, possibly all of Quilst. Is it not good enough?" The voice sounded on the verge of tears. No, Mally stammered. "It's fine." The figure of a very tall woman emerged, her head nearly brushing the ceiling. Mally breathed out a sigh of relief. It wasn't a massive spider after all. She squinted, trying to see the woman clearly. She had high cheekbones, a small nose, and brilliant blue eyes stitched over shiny white fabric. A slash of black split one of her cheeks, as if her face had been ripped apart and badly mended. A spiky crown of silver and gold spun around her head. It shone as bright as the sun and filled the room with a strange flashing light. "Then why were you trying to leave?" she asked, coming closer and closer. The sound again. Snip, snip, snip. Mally glanced down and gasped. The creature was balanced on the points of two huge pairs of scissors. They lifted her high in the air and walked for her, opening with a soft snick and closing with a sharp snip. Her body was voluptuous and pieced from black velvet fabrics that seemed to soak up all the light from her crown. Her hands were shaped like mittens, all the fingers fused together except for her thumb, and she had no feet. Her legs tapered down to sharp points that dangled in the air as the scissor blades propelled her closer. The shape of her hands and feet reminded Mally of a set of dolls she'd seen at a quilt show with Grandma, and with a jolt, she realized that's what this creature must be. But how did she get here? She thought. How is this weird doll in Quilst? Snip, snip, snip. Mally's back hit the wall, and Miss Bunny gave a little squeak inside the backpack. My name is Mally. Who are you?" Mally asked quickly to cover up the sound. "Mally, Mally, Mally." The woman cocked her head unnaturally to the side, and her voice took on a hard edge. "Is that short for Mallory?" Yes, Mallory Lauren Spencer." "Ah, Mally May to save the day." The woman's mouth split into a strange smile. "My name is Menda. I am the Queen of Quilst." "The Queen, but—" Mally trailed off as the scissors on the doll's hip twitched. "Pleased to meet you, Queen Menda." She crossed her legs at her ankles and bowed slightly in her best imitation of a curtsy. She'd seen it in a movie about a princess a few years ago. "Are you really?" With a snip, the scissors on her hips opened wide, and Menda slid down to stand on her pointy legs. She reached forward, and Mally shrank back, but she was only holding out her hand to shake. Mally gripped the strange mitten shape and found the black fabric soft and cushy, but her grip was painfully tight. Mally winced as Menda squeezed her hand. The doll reeked of lavender, so strong it instantly made her eyes water. Mally usually liked the scent because it reminded her of the special sachets Grandma packed with her quilts in storage, but the lavender smell coming from Menda was just too strong. Standing so close, Mally could see the seams holding the creature together. Her stitches were sloppy, and so big in places the seams gaped, allowing the stuffing from the inside to leak out. Mally's eyes caught on a particularly wide gap at her elbow. A chunk of gray fiber bulged out from the surface, like a massive pimple. Menda shoved her face closer, gripping Mally's hand. The crown on her head spun faster, flashing like a strobe light through the room. "What are you looking at? What do you see?" With a faint snick, 2 pairs of scissors flipped over her shoulders, their sharp tips inches from Mally's face. Nothing," Mally stammered. The scissors slid back as Menda's face crumpled. "I'm hurt, Mally May. You were trying to leave without saying goodbye." "No, I wasn't." Mally's head spun as Menda flipped from anger to sadness and back again in seconds. "Don't lie. You cut the door. You were trying to leave." The crazy creature buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry. I really need to get home. I only meant to come here for a little while to—" She felt Miss Bunny shift in the book bag and decided to leave out any mention of Grandma for now. "But it's been hours. I need to get home." Snip. The massive scissors on her hips slid closed with a snap, and Menda rose several feet to tower over her. "Why did you come here? How did you enter Quilst?" I just wanted to see the world. I came through the door." Mally shrank back against the wall as the queen swelled with rage. "You lie! When you cut the fabric in this quilt, I can feel it." Menda tapped the crown spinning on her head. "You were trying to find the maker, weren't you?" "Maker? I don't know what you're talking about." Menda stormed to the window. With her back turned, Mally counted 12 pairs of scissors in all shapes and sizes, secured to the fabric on her back and hips. With a jolt, she recognized several from Grandma's sewing room. The red-handled pair was always kept in a cup on the cutting table, while the largest shears were exclusively for cutting dressmaking fabric. How does she have those? Mally thought. They were all much bigger than they should be. The shears stretched to over 4 feet long, the metal handles thicker than Mally's wrists. Menda caressed the side of the windowsill and trailed her thumb over the even row of stitching that held the purple fabrics in place. She sighed. "Such delicate work when she actually tries. Yes, my lovelies, let's take care of this." One of the smaller scissors on her back swung around quickly and cut into the seam, breaking the thread. Mally gasped as the seam split. Menda ran her hand over the cut, encouraging the edges of the fabric to fray. The crown on her head spun faster. Menda hunched her shoulders, her face contorting into a grimace of pain. "Why are you doing that?" Mally cried. "Because I can," Menda said softly, her eyes closed. She rolled her hand over the frayed mess, and a ball of purple thread began to form. Mally watched, her stomach twisting, as 3 tiny spiders emerged. Broken fibers slid out from their bodies, braided together, and became sturdy legs. They scurried up Menda's arm to circle her wrist like a bracelet. Menda flicked her hand, and the spiders on the floor cushion rolled together too, forming a messy ball. It was a horrible cross between a spider and the blob monster Mally had seen in an old movie. Thousands of legs stuck out in all directions, and it half rolled, half oozed itself across the floor. "Aren't my pets beautiful?" Menda asked happily. The crown had slowed its spinning, but her shoulders remained hunched, jutting her head forward at a freakish angle. The creature rolled to her, then split in half and lifted itself, 100 thread legs wiggling madly until it found her dark fabric. Mally pressed her fist hard against her mouth as the creature slid up Menda's leg, over the curves of her body and down her arm to rest on her open palm. The purple spiders on her wrist squished themselves against the thing, and they were absorbed instantly. The fibers suddenly knitted themselves together into a roundish shape with 8 braided yarn legs. "Do you not like spiders? Do they frighten you, Mally May?" Menda asked, stroking the monster. Mally shook her head, gripping the straps of her book bag tighter. She glanced at the open door, judging the distance. "Do you ever tell the truth?" Menda shrieked. Without warning, she hurled the giant spider straight at Mally's face. Mally ducked, covering her head with her arms. The ball just missed her, and she felt it ruffle her hair as it flew overhead. She knew this was her one and only chance to escape. She leapt towards the door. But Menda was just a few feet away, standing in front of the window. 2 pairs of scissors on her back clicked open and waved threateningly in the air. "Find her for me, my good pet," she said in a sing-song voice. Something snagged her ankle, and Mally was jerked to the ground. Her hands burned as she slid several feet across the room. She glanced back to see what had tripped her. Menda's spider monster had braided itself into a thick rope. One end was wrapped around her ankle, and as she watched, tiny threads wiggled out and wove up her jeans. It was just like before. Mally was being stitched in place. "Resourceful, isn't it?" Menda laughed. "My little snarls know exactly what I want them to do and are wonderfully efficient about making it happen. They can become webs and spiders and even those flying things. What are they called?" Mally ignored her. She twisted her body around, pulling her free leg underneath so she sat in a half crouch, facing the thread monster. Her movement swung the metal case on her necklace hard against her shoulder, reminding her it was there. She pulled the scissors out of her pocket and slashed at the grasping fibers. She cut through several threads, and they immediately stopped moving. Mally hacked at the attacking cords, but the scissor blades were so tiny she couldn't manage to cut through the entire rope at once. As she sliced, more threads wove into her socks or caught the hem of her jeans. Even her red sneakers were covered with stitches running in all directions in a dozen different colors of thread. "Stop it! Stop stitching me!" Mally yelled, cutting another bunch of threads attacking her knee. "Bats! That's what they're called. If you thought my spider web was scary, just wait until you see one of my bats flying through the air." Menda suddenly spun around the room, flapping her black arms. Mally focused all her energy on the attacking threads. She changed her grip on the scissors, opening the handles wide so she could saw at the rope. It worked. Mally was suddenly cutting faster than the threads could attack. She leaned back with all her weight and found she could move her foot several inches. "Oh, that won't do, pets," Menda said, twirling to a stop. "She's getting ahead of you. Let's go back to spiders. Itsy bitsy spiders." At her words, the braided rope and all the threads stitched into Mally's clothes instantly wiggled out and began rolling into tiny balls. Mally saw her chance. She jerked her leg free and crawled as fast as she could for the door. A low rumble sounded from behind. Mally was nearly at the doorframe. She caught the edge of the fabric and pulled herself up to her feet. The rumble grew into a roar, and she couldn't help herself. She glanced back into the room. What she saw made her heart stop dead. Spiders. The floor was a sea of moving bodies and legs. There was no place to run and no time to scream. In seconds, the spiders covered her body from head to toe and pulled her back down to the floor. The threads dug in, securing her so tight Mally fought to draw breath. Snip, snip, snip. Menda strutted over and slowly sank to the tips of her pointy legs, then kept sliding down until she was kneeling on the floor in front of her. She grabbed her chin roughly, forcing Mally to look her in the eye. "Are you ready to stop lying and tell me the truth?" she asked. "Where is the maker?"
I don't know what you're talking about. Ugh!
Mally grunted as the threads binding her chest squeezed tighter. "They will keep squeezing, and then you'll go pop," Menda sang. Then her voice turned hard as she demanded, "Tell me the truth. Why are you here? Where is the maker?" The Queen's face swam before Mally's eyes. "I'm just looking for my grandma," she cried. "I don't know anything about a maker. Please just let me go find my grandma." Tears slipped down her cheeks and into Menda's soft velvet hand. "Grandma? Grandma." Menda rolled back on her heels, her head cocked at an unnatural angle. "Who is your grandma?" Mally pressed her lips closed. She hated how much she'd already let slip. "Well, based on your name and this lovely set of snips you carry, I can guess." Menda plucked the scissors from her hand. "Grace Mallory Harrison Wright." The blood drained from Mally's face as the Queen's mouth split in a wide grin. "Dear old Granny Grace. My, how times have changed." She slid the chain off Mally's neck and looped it around her own. "I must say this was entertaining. Maybe even more entertaining than seeing you in my web outside." Menda slid the scissors into their case with a little click. "Look at that! You've brought me a new lovely, and I get to wear it in such a fashionable way." She adjusted the scissor holder to rest in the middle of her curvy chest. "Thank you, Mally May. Now, to business. Where is your grandma?" "I don't know," Mally wheezed. "I don't know where she is. She's been missing for 6 months. I came here to find her." "I don't believe you."
"Please, please, you must believe me. I came through the door and I've been searching for her."
Mally stopped to draw breath.
"If you're looking for her too, we could look together. I'm sure we could find her."
"Find her together? Ha!" Menda barked out a laugh. "Do you know what I plan to do with Grace Wright when I find her?" All the spiders suddenly released their hold, and Mally gasped in relief. But it was short-lived. Menda's hand lashed out, and she lifted Mally by her backpack handle as if she weighed nothing. The scissor blades snicked open, lifting until she dangled several feet above the ground. The Queen brought her face so close Mally could see the individual stitches of blue thread forming her eyes. The smell of lavender was so strong Mally could taste it in the back of her throat. "I plan to cut the deepest, darkest hole I can, and then I'm going to drop her in it." She opened her hand, and Mally fell into a heap at her feet. She scrambled away, putting as much distance between herself and Menda as she could. The Queen sighed, the crown on her head spinning madly. "I'm still not quite sure you're telling the truth," she said. She held out her hand, and 3 purple spiders jumped into her palm. She brought her hands together, and the threads compressed into a thin sheet. "This will even things out." The Queen walked to the far corner of the room. Mally couldn't see what she was doing, but the air suddenly went ice cold. She wrapped her arms around her knees and curled into a ball. She wasn't being held down by anything now, but she couldn't move. A strange pressure built behind her eyes and across her chest. She struggled to breathe and clenched her fists, fighting back the urge to cry. "It's okay, Mally May." Menda caressed her cheek. Her sad face was back. "You can tell me anything. Where is Grandma? Where can I find her? You know, I was just joking about dropping her into a hole. I just want to find her to make sure she's okay." Mally's mouth opened of its own accord. She didn't want to speak, and the words came out in a rasp. "I don't know." She choked out the last word and lost her battle with her tears. She pressed her head to her knees and sobbed. Ugh! Menda shoved her away in disgust. Snip, snip, snip. Mally faintly heard her click across the room. She started to pace, talking to herself in a low mutter. She can't be lying. We're sure of that, my lovelies, but she might be useful. What if the child could draw her out? Make a show of it. Mally stopped listening. Flashes of her worst memories began to play in her head. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear, and she couldn't feel anything except her heart splitting into a million pieces.